Hello, and welcome back to the Survivor's Mic podcast. I'm your host, Posh, and I'm happy that we are on episode 9. And this week has been very interesting in a way that this week has paved a way for, the center of this podcast and the reason why I started it in the first place. So, there's an idea of survival, and it can be anything. It can be surviving traumatic experiences, it can be surviving life, for example, from, deadly diseases or accidents. It can be surviving losing your loved ones or being left, or, you know, all those things that happen in life. But the main center of why I believe that all this work, all this podcasting, and anything else that I do in the world, it is really founded on surviving childhood abuse, right? And of course, we'll get into more depth on that. But I say this week was interesting because I had so many conversations with my sibling, my brother, who is very dear to me, and also my cousins who are, from my father's side. So it all started on having to plan to meet up because our elder cousin is getting married. And that idea was so funny to me, but I carried so many emotions around it as well. And also, it turns out that for my brother, whom I grew up with in a very, dysfunctional, abusive, household, and for years I was praying for something specific for him, right? As my brother, I love him dearly. We suffered together, and when I was growing up, he was I would call him my protector. He fought for me. He used to beat me for sure. If you're African, you would know that. You would know that your brother will beat the shit out of you. I'm sorry, you know. But despite all that, he really fought my battles. He really protected me as a girl child, and it's funny. It's very interesting how, children naturally they engineer their mindset on, protection coming from adults, right? The belief or the expectation is that I'm just gonna be a child, and the adults will take care of me. But that was not my case. That was not our case with my brother when we were growing up. And so he calls me, last week, and I'm in the gym. I'm working out and sweating, and so my phone rings, and I'm like, who is calling me? And then I saw it's him, so I was like, oh, hold on, you can't ignore this one because he doesn't call that frequently. So I pick up my phone, and the first news he gives me is exactly that which I spent, I think it's over a decade, praying for him, right? And I wouldn't want to say that there were times I felt like God was not answering because I prayed about it. It was something that was like reflex for me, just because it's my brother. And every time I'm in my, secret place, or, seeking the Lord, of course, I'm going to pray for my family. I'm going to pray for my brother. I'm going to pray, for his daughter. So he gives me this news. I was just blown away, and I'm thinking, oh, wow. Wow. And it's so interesting how it's almost like we pray for something because we want it, and then when it comes, we act shocked, it's something really my my Jesus himself help us. If you're a Christian, you would know this. And if you don't struggle with it, bless you. Please pray for all of us. I think the level of faith is just so interesting. So we pray to God because we know we can't do without him, you know, but also we are not praying with confidence that he's actually going to do it, you know, and then he does. And then you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I doubted. You know, I'm sorry, I didn't really think he would pull it up, you know, not because he's not powerful, but because maybe sometimes we're just so out of touch, and we look at ourselves, we look at the things we have gone through, the things we have done as well, you know, thank God for mercy. And we just don't think that he's gonna come through, right? So I'm busy carrying all these emotions and all these feelings, and I just took a moment to picture how we used to live our lives as children, how, you know, just having a meal that you were not given, it was a good reason for you to be beaten, right? To be whipped. We would be sent to bed with no food. We were sent to school with no food. I remember there was a time we were caught eating at 2 a.m. And of course, you get punished for that. And for me, I remember thinking, why are human beings as adults putting so much weight and responsibility on children? You know, when a child has to mature earlier than everybody else, I experienced that my whole life, where I would have conversations with people, and then we get to the age, you know, the golden question, how old are you, right? And people will always be shocked and be like, oh my God, you're too mature for your age. And even though that was a nice compliment, I think I always said at the back of my mind, if only you knew what it took. If only you knew the reason why I'm actually mature than my age, because I had to, right? It was out of necessity. So I think the wounds of childhood abuse are, they are very hard for me to find words to explain. And I hope, you know, the goal is to make this a series. So I'm praying for grace to be able to articulate it without me breaking down, hopefully. But I've taken years to process things and to kind of like not really clear them up, but to just kind of like carry this piece around the fact that, okay, these are the things that happened, and trying to figure out how to live with that idea and with that reality, right? But I think, you know, the more I grow up, the more I've gotten into relationships before, the more I am with a partner who is intentional and, you know, headed to building our own family, I find myself putting pressure on myself, like, oh, I if anything, I don't know the kind of a mother I want to be, but I definitely know the kind of a mother I don't want to be, right? And it's so interesting, and it's built really around just the idea that children are to be children, you know? If we would give anything to the generations that are to come, it would just to allow them to be children, because we can't even say to allow them to be who they are, because the more they grow up, the more they evolve and become whoever they become, right? So there's a long list of, you know, things that happen in childhood that would follow us through life. And sometimes I think we put so much blame on people and some of the behaviors they pull up, but it's all the things that they get to see. I was reading something, you know, psychology related, of course, because I passed through nursing school, and understanding the human brain, or how the human operates, is very fascinating to me, even though I'm more of a mathematics and technical person, right? And that study was saying the most crucial phase of a child's life is between 3 to 5 years. and then there will come another one between 6 and 9 years. But those, that phase from 3 to 5, they are taking notice. They are noticing everything and anything, right, that is happening, including the emotions of those who are around them. So if you are a mother, right, and you are breastfeeding your baby and probably crying at the same time, that's exactly the energy they are taking into. They're tapping into that, right? If you're happy, and we see that we have held babies before, I'm sure most of us. If you smile at a baby, that's what they give you, right? If you frown, they also get confused, like, oh, what is happening, And now we don't even want to start of talking about, couples fighting, couples yelling at each other, and all those unhealthy, situations and environments that we put children into, right? So I've realized that even though I don't quite consider myself like an extremely emotional person, I never used to be the girl who cries watching movies, but the more I grow up, the more it's becoming easy, and I don't even understand that. But when I'm around children, because now I live in Europe, for example, and it's kind of like normal for people to give birth and make a decision that they don't want to be part of the children's life, and then they just let them go. And I remember I used to work in this institution when I was still fresh in Germany. And they told me the history of the girl. She was this nice. She wasn't Caucasian. She was mixed. Yeah. So I was reading, like, the rich history of her life, and turns out the dad was from Zimbabwe, but the mom was the one who was European. And they made that decision that they didn't want to keep the child. And I remember going into the bathroom and crying. And I've always carried this, sorry, excuse me, I've always carried this emotion where I'm like, why do we do this as adults? Because ultimately we can make those decisions, right? We have the power to say, oh, we don't want to have a kid, so we don't have to. We will make sure that we don't have a child, right? And it's still the same case with, couples who meet up with, or individuals who meet their partners who have children already. They accept that, and then they abuse those children. That was my case, right? I think for me, what made me more, I don't want to say disappointed. I think there's obviously a reason why my story is the way it is, but there was just pain because it didn't happen to me once. It happened to me 2 times, where your parents' partner comes into your life, and they are vowing all these things. They will be there, and they will, you know treat you as children, and then it turns out that it is not the case. And I think my my brother and I's situation, and now I laugh about it, but it's not funny. It wasn't even funny then. It was tougher because those individuals came in with their own children as well. But if you grew up in an African household, you would know that, of course there are men who abuse children, but it's very high on the women's side, and it's disappointing because women, we are created to nature naturally, right? We take care, we protect, we look after, we nurture. I said that word. That's the best word to use. We are created to nature, right? So it was quite disappointing, or it is quite disappointing until today, that individuals who carry the title stepmothers, they are not the greatest people that you hear about, at least in my country where I come from, right? So, of course, the dynamics of being a stepchild from both ends were different, because obviously my male parent, all they were doing was to provide for the household. But then, on the other hand, this one who stays at home 24/7. Yeah, there were consequences for that. There were consequences for that. I think the more we go, the more we go with the episode, I don't want to go, I don't want to do it throughout. I think I'm going to split it per month. But the physical abuse, and this might sound weird, but at a tender age, I trained myself how to deal with physical abuse. There was a time that I clearly remember until today where I was in primary school. And one of my teachers sent a complaint to my dad. And they said, your child is, they used the Shona word. And because not everyone hears Shona, there's no reason for me to say the word. But basically, when you boil, let's say beans, if you have made beans at all, because I know some people buy like canned beans, but if you boil beans, at the beginning of cooking them, there is a number of them that goes up, and those ones that goes up, naturally you have to take them out because they will never ripe, even if you cooked them for a year, they will not be ripe. And in Shona, we call those a specific name. It's called Nini. And she said to my dad, that's how your child is, because I've been beating this child over mathematics and she's not getting it. And I beat her all the time, and it's like she doesn't feel it anymore. You can beat her all you want. She's just gonna be standing there, no emotion. I wouldn't even cry. And that was the level of physical abuse. That's the level of beating I got at home, that I became so familiar with it. I was so used to being beaten that it didn't do anything to me anymore, right? And it's very unfortunate because beyond just that physical, even at an emotional level, if you are so used to being despised, to being rejected, you'd think that living in your own space and being alone is normal when it is not. I've also suffered from that, where I naturally think, oh, I just want to be in my space until I'm depressed. And I'm like, hold on, I need to be around other people, right? So, all those effects, or, the physical damage that it does, the psychological damage, your mindset, and how you battle with believing in yourself or in anything at all in life, it becomes very hard because you have been put in this space where you are convinced day and night of how less of a human being you are. So I know I did introductions a lot, but I'm so glad because after episode 10, we are really going to be focusing a lot on the idea of surviving and, childhood abuse, the idea of surviving childhood abuse and, the effects of those foundations that are flawed like that. Of course, there's no child who's going to have a perfect childhood. But I think, things like physical abuse, emotional abuse, and then comes in spiritual abuse, because that abuse that you come with from your childhood, it builds into your adulthood. You know, I remember one day looking at myself in the mirror, I was, hold on. I thought I would be molested only in my country. Why is this happening to me in Europe where everyone pretends to be open minded? And I'm here and I'm being molested 5 times in 6 years. Statistically, that's terrible. It means I had a good share of abuse per year. And I'm 7,000 kilometers away from my family. I think that's 14K miles. It's crazy. It is crazy. It's not easy, right? So this is a little intro of what we will get into, really focusing on those, effects of childhood abuse, also just, transitioning into adulthood and still finding yourself in situations where you feel like certain events, they take you back to a place that you never want to go back, right? All these memories that you have. that you never want to have. So I look forward to it. I look forward to it. And I'll be honest with you guys. Let me just be very honest and blunt, and let me be as human as I can be about this. This is also so much healing, just as I am hoping that it is healing to somebody else. Because for me to sit here, it took me a year. I think I've mentioned this before. It took me a year to launch this podcast. I had it all figured out. I had the title. I had, a brief of an idea of what I would talk about. And I mean, basically, my life is already, you know, it has dynamics that drove me to start the podcast. And I really wanted to be that voice, not to fix anybody's life because I can't fix mine either. But I just wanted to be able to speak up on things I know most people go through, you know. And by the time we call ourselves survivors, it would have been series, different seasons, of navigating life situations and surviving different kinds of, things. So I'm looking forward to this. And I'm glad and I hope that you got a little bit of a glimpse of where we are headed. And as I've also started to work on the team for the podcast, I think a few of you have seen that we are also starting to get onto TikTok, and just making sure that we keep on growing as a community. And really, it's not about huge numbers of us. I think even if we're a small group of people, but we have time to talk about these things, and we get to walk our little baby steps into healing, that would be the most fulfilling thing ever. So if you find or you bump into the podcast page on TikTok, it's called The Survivor's Mic. Feel free to send us messages and tell us your story, if you want your story to be heard, or if you want your story to be shared or not to be shared, or to be spoken about anonymously. Everything is totally welcome, because this is what I've learned. There is definitely a reason why our stories are the way they are. And I know sometimes when we are in tough seasons and going through that, we don't really want to embrace that. But ultimately, everything carries a purpose on its own of why it had to go down the way it did. So, sincerely, I love you guys. I appreciate you. I'm growing personally as I'm doing this, because these are the early days and sometimes there's nobody listening at all. But I'm just carrying this hope. I'm just carrying this feeling that it will these episodes will get into the hands that they're supposed to get into. They will get into the ears that they are supposed to get into. And that will be the most fulfilling thing for me. So thank you. I appreciate you. And I will see you next time. I'm your host, Posh.